There is no set time period for the amount of servicing you should be doing on your e-bike, as we all ride in different conditions and we ride different amounts. But in short, the more riding you do, the more maintenance you should be doing, especially if that is in bad conditions. So today, let's take a look at the things you need to be doing and when you should be doing it. So there's a few main areas we need to think about when it comes to servicing your e-mountain bike. It's going to be the motor, the battery, the leads that control it, the control unit, the tyres, the wheels, the brakes, and of course the drivetrain. Let's start with that motor. Now the motor itself is a sealed unit which requires absolutely zero maintenance by you. It should do around 20,000 miles, so factor that in for your mileage. However, something you can do every couple of months, particularly if you're riding in muddy conditions, is to whip off those external motor covers. Now, lots of different motors have plastic units that surround it, protecting it from the elements, but you can get a mud build-up underneath there. So whip those covers off, take that away, spray some water disperser spray in there, maybe some dielectric grease around those contacts to stop that water building up. And whilst you're in there, you really need to make sure the drain holes underneath your motor cover are free. That just helps all that water run away from that motor area, because if you do get a clogged up drain, you could essentially end up filling this whole down tube with water, and therefore it's going to soak that battery and your motor unit. So make sure those drains are definitely clear. Now, something you should be doing every month or so is inspecting the leads that are on your e-bike. Now, there's a bunch of these all over the bike that connect the battery to the motor, the speed sensor to the motor, and of course that display unit back down to that unit as well. And if these get damaged or they get snagged or get worn through, it could be the end of your ride. So an inspection of these parts is definitely vital. So here's a few examples of those leads that are on your e-bike. Now this is a speed sensor wire. Now this is the wire that reads the wheel speed and goes all the way down the back of the swing arm and into that motor area. Now these can get damaged from that wheel, or trail debris can flick up and snap that wire. So if that happens, that's definitely game over. Now this is the main motor lead connection area here. You've got all those wires that come from that speed sensor, the motor, the head unit, all connected down here. You just need to inspect this area, make sure it's nice and clean, free of water, there's no corrosion going in there, so you can whip some of these leads out. It's all going to differ as to what motor you're running on your bike, but on the Shimano unit, these literally can pull out of that motor area. Just make sure they're nice and clean. Put some dielectric grease around this area, not in the contacts, just around it. It's going to stop all that water running off. Give it a quick spray with some water dispersing spray, and you should be good to go. Now this one you should be doing before every single ride on your e-mountain bike. You're going to have a magnet on the rear of the bike. Now it could be screwed onto the spokes of the bike, or it could be housed in that rear disc, but you just need to make sure these are nice and secure and they're clean, because if they're not clean, you're not going to get a reading going to that speed sensor and getting a reading of how fast that rear wheel is spinning. Now if you've got the ones that screw onto the spokes, just make sure they are nice and secure, and they do have a habit of either sliding down the spokes, so you're going to be out of alignment, or they can fall apart or fall off completely. And whilst you're there, just inspect that speed sensor mount inside of the dropout. Just make sure that's nice and secure, and again, it is clean. Because if it's dirty, as I mentioned earlier, you will not be getting any speed reading and probably get a fault code on your head unit. The battery on your e-bike is a sealed unit, and it doesn't require any maintenance as such, but every couple of months or so, or more if you're riding in bad conditions, it's a great idea just to whip it out, give it a quick wipe over with a damp cloth. Just inspect those terminals on there, just make sure there's no corrosion building up or any moisture entering that area too. Get some water dispersing spray on there, just give it a quick wipe over. Inspect the retaining mechanism too. It's also great to keep that clean. And if there's a key, just lube that mechanism up, or if there's a bolt, get some grease in there, just to make sure next time you come to remove that battery, it will come out nice and easy. But yeah, just some nice rust inhibitor in there. If there's any rust going on, keep it clean, and that battery will last you for a long, long time. Now, before you go out for each ride on your e-mountain bike, it's a great idea to inspect the tires on your e-mountain bike. They have a really stressful life hitting all those rocks and roots. So just look out for anything that's embedded in the tire or any big splits, especially on the sidewall. Inspect that the wheel's running true as well, because sometimes your tire can actually pop out of the rim and become unseated, or maybe that carcass could be twisted, so you're gonna have a straight wheel but a buckled kind of tire. Also, just inspect the wear of the tyre. If you've got rounded edges on there, it's not going to give you a lot of grip, and bear in mind you might need to replace that pretty soon. Also, if you're running a tubeless setup, be sure to check out how much sealant you've got left in your tyre, because it can dry out over time and it won't leave you protected. Now, another part of your e-bike that has an even harder life than the tyres is going to be the wheels that support your whole bike. Now, it's a great idea every month or so to give these a bit of loving. First up, you just need to spin that wheel really slowly and literally just click your finger around the spokes as it goes. Now, this will denote any broken spokes or any loose spokes too. You should be able to feel a uniform tension on each pair of spokes as it passes through, so check that. And then you also need to take a look at the wheel bearings in your bike. Now, if you grab the top of the wheel at about 12 o'clock, hold the frame and give the wheel a good side-to-side push. This will let you know if those wheel bearings are shot. Give it a spin too. If you hear that it's pretty rough sounding, then the chances are your wheel bearings are going to need a little bit of love. And also on the back wheel, you have the free hub. Now, all of these will make noise. You'll hear that ticking coming from it, but this will vary on different models. You might have a slightly silent one, or one that is like a bee coming down the trail. It's going to be really loud. But any change in that noise definitely needs investigation, as does a free hub that is lagging. So when you go to pedal, it might lag a little bit, or any ominous cracking or scrunching noises coming from it definitely needs some looking at. Now, whilst you're giving your wheels a little bit of loving, that lube is definitely important to apply. Now, this helps the axle slide in and out of the hub, and every time you need to remove that wheel, it's just going to make your life a little bit easier than having a stuck axle, because there's nothing worse than that, struggling to get that wheel out when you've got dirty hands and a puncher to fix. Now, the brakes on your e-bike have a really important job to do, and it's worth checking these out before every single ride. Things to look out for on your brakes is going to be how much pad material you've got left on the caliper. So just take a quick look through the top of the caliper, and you should have a few mil of brake pad material left on those pads. If it's getting really low, you could run into the danger of going metal to metal on that brake rotor and damaging both your rotor and, of course, the caliper. Now, the caliper itself, just make sure that's nice and secure too. The rotors, give the wheel a spin, listen out for any contact whatsoever. If it's constantly rubbing, you just need to realign that caliper. If you've got a noise that is just inconsistent rub, it could denote that that rotor is bent in a spot. Now, you can true some of these up so they will run nice and straight. And just check that rotor is secure to that rear hub too. You can have a center lock design on there, or the bolts, you could have a 6-bolt one. Just make sure they're nice and tight, and a great way of doing this is holding onto your brakes and rocking the bike back and forward, and those rotors should stay nice and still. If they're moving, it means that they're loose. And up at the other end, the brake lever, just check that lever pull is consistent, it's not spongy, and again, just make sure those levers are nice and secure too. They're not going to be moving around if you're to hit any jumps or drops. Now, your brakes should be silent and powerful in operation. If they're not, it usually means that they're contaminated. Could be from some overspray from chain lube, or it could be a leak coming from the pistons in your caliper. If you've got any noise, it needs investigating. Usually the only fix of this is going to be a clean up with some brake cleaner on your rotor and to fit some fresh new pads. The drivetrain on your e-bike needs a bit of loving before and after every single ride you do, particularly if you're riding in bad conditions. Your power mixed in with that motor power and a bit of grime on your chain can create that ultimate destroyer for an e-bike drivetrain. So keeping on top of that lube is definitely key here. And there's a few other things you need to look at when it comes to the drivetrain. The chain is one of the parts that needs a lot of loving. You definitely need a chain checker in your toolbox. This lets you know when that chain is totally worn out And if you do continue using that worn out chain, it's going to take out the cassette and the chainring. So a chain checker is definitely vital here. And also cycle that chain around nice and slowly, inspect it for twisted or damaged or broken links. If you find any of that going on, you need to replace that chain super quick because it will fail on you. And the cassette on the rear of your bike, this needs a lot of loving too. Just get the debris out, those smaller cogs. Also inspect it for damage going on and wear again. And also on that front chainring, same applies here. Keep it nice and clean. And again, inspect it for wear. And if any of that's worn out, you need to replace it ASAP. Then we have the rear mech on the back of the bike changing all the gears. Now you need to inspect and check the clutch. Is your clutch working real efficiently and stopping all that chain slap? Or is it even turned on? Make sure it's switched on at all times when you're riding your bike. Inspect the jockey wheels, the smaller jockey wheels that guide your chain around the rear mech. Make sure they're nice and clean and free of gunk, and just check the tightness too. And also take a look at the back of your bike. Just check that your rear mech is sitting nice in line. If it's slightly out of line, you're going to be experiencing changing problems. If you do notice that it is slightly out of line, maybe take it along to your local bike shop and get that rear mech hanger realigned, and that should sort out all your shifting blues. Now, whilst you're at that chainring area, it's worth checking out those crank bolts too. If these are working loose, you could be at risk of having your crank fall off, or maybe stretching the tapers that are inside those cranks and making your crank always come loose. If you've got a chainring with chainring bolts, make sure they're nipped up nice and tight. And again, just make sure all of these bolts are nipped up to those manufacturer's specifications. So there we are, that's the main things you need to be looking out for on your e-mountain bike. And as I mentioned earlier, it's going to differ for every person. We all ride our bikes differently, and the amount we ride them, and in different locations too. But if I've left anything vital out, get involved in the comments box down below. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to us here on EMBN. And whilst you're there, check out our merch shop and get yourself kitted up.